Welcome, everyone. We will give a few minutes to allow people to join the stream. Thank you for joining day two of the citywide premiere of North 2020's Closing the Divide. We hope that you found the speakers of day one to be very impactful as we have equally dynamic speakers for day two. We encourage you to take notes as there will be information and resources shared throughout the viewing of this session. Thank you and enjoy.
Dee is a Newark resident. I'm going to start with that. That's not in her bio, but I want to start there. Dee is a Newark resident. She is a certified coach, international speaker who advises on race relations, diversity and inclusion, and remote and hybrid workforce engagement. She has a amazing background in corporate and executive leadership. She worked with several Fortune 500 companies, including Merrill Lynch, Prudential Securities, Moody Investor Services, Johnson & Johnson, and the New York Times. And primarily her work with these companies have been to engage diverse populations to improve workplace culture. So Dee, I am going to turn it over to you.
All right, well, awesome. Thank you so much for this work, and thank you for inviting me. I think this is a necessary conversation, necessary work that Newark Alliance is doing, and everybody here. So just in terms of an agenda in the hour that we have together, next slide, I'm going to share, and we'll just touch on a little bit of the context, right? So looking at equity-centered programming, but looking at the context for programming. I think that's one of the drivers, so that's necessary. And then how do we, or looking at where there is systemic racism, we'll touch on that for a second, and then how to become part of the solution. So you all know that we're talking about equity-centered programming, but it really is about becoming part of the solution. You're already part of the solution in the work that you do in your respective organizations, but the intent with equity-centered programming and the framing of our conversation today is how do you connect the dots at the next level? At the if your organization strategy is at the 1.0, it's how do you connect and evolve and elevate your programming to 2.0, because we're in a very different time. And so, and then we'll have a bit of an exercise, and I'm also going to pose some questions while we are going through this session. So you can, if you have something to take notes, I would just encourage you, if it speaks to you, to take notes as we go along, and we'll see what kind of time. So if we can go to the next slide, I think, you know, I mean, it's not necessary, or it is necessary, I think, to just, again, frame where we are. And so I'm curious as to how you all are framing how, where we are right now, right? We are amid a global reckoning of racism against Black people in America, right? This is a global reckoning, right? People protesting all over the planet. So this is global, and we're talking specifically about Black people, and we're talking specifically about racism. So one of the things that I have been doing in our team is engaging in a lot of these conversations and next step corporations and organizations take in their work. And one of the things that we are sort of educating folks on is, in many ways, this is not necessarily about diversity. This is about relations, and so those are two different things. And the reason we are holding and sort of shaping the vision right now is, while or race relations, the private sector, it may perceive to fall under diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion is about workplace culture, and it's about representation. But the issues dealing with right now is where all the presenters have systemic racism against Black people, different than you know, recruiting, you know, to make sure that you have underrepresented on your in your workplace. And so I just wanted to frame this. This is a global reckoning, and people all over the planet have joined in. So this is not about white versus Black, but this is about everyone versus racism, right? It's not about white versus Black. This is about everyone versus white supremacy. And that's the beauty in the time that we are in right now. Lots of people are talking, lots of things coming in. Let's go to the next slide. You know, you have corporations speaking out right now. You have, you know, activists speaking out right now. You have even nonprofit leaders and organization leaders. Pretty much everyone is chiming in. I think my screen might be frozen, but everyone is chiming in. So we have all of these, you know, voices and opinions and thoughts and emotions coming through from every direction. So private sector is speaking out and boldly declaring that they are anti-racist and they are making contributions. Big brands are, you know, for the most part, now saying that they respect Black lives, right? Connecting the dots from a consumer perspective. You're hearing voices all over the planet about where we are right now. And again, that is a global reckoning of racism against Black people in the country. And so with that, it presents a different, or I should say a new opportunity. Okay, so now you're gonna put a pin there because we're gonna come back to that and now move into, I want to also invite the question, where do you see, for you, this is not about everybody else and what the world is talking about, this is now about you. Where do you see the biggest pain point in systemic racism? Can you just, as it pertains to equity-centered programming, where we're going to have the greatest opportunity is where we have the greatest passion and pain point. In other words, wherever it is that you are, you see things and you know things and you hear things that others may not know, see, and hear. And so it's important for us to identify, where do you see the systemic racism in your space? So if you could post that in the chat. And again, all of, or at least these two questions are going to help inform equity-centered programming, okay? All right, so then I wanna move into the discussion about equity-centered programming. And you know, you all are intelligent, brilliant leaders, so I first wanna ask you the question, we're gonna go to the next slide. And what does equity-centered programming look like in your organization today, right? Because some of you may be there, right? In fact, you could facilitate the session, right? You've been doing this work, whether it's 10 years, whether it's 2 years, whether it's 15 years, you understand the nature of where we are. So the question before we go in is, what does equity-centered programming look like right now for you and your organization? If you could just write that down. You can take notes offline. If you want to share in the chat, that'd be great. We appreciate and welcome your engagement, since we're having to be in a virtual space and we can't be together. So what is equity-centered programming look like in your organization? That's question number one. Second question I want to ask you before we move further is, what equity-centered model are you using, if you are using one at all? So let's advance the slide. What's the model that you use, if any?
In our chat, that for them, equity-centered program models are geared towards helping Black, Indigenous people of color, and that's what they center their model in. So we don't have any models themselves, so this may be a really good topic for us to dive into.
Okay, awesome, awesome. I'm going to touch on a model. Thank you so much, Della. So if we advance the slide, I'm going to say there's two ways that we can delve into equity-centered programming. And so one model I wanted to introduce you all to is ECCCD. And this equity-centered community design model, it has three components: people, systems, and power. The reason I wanted to share this as one of two solutions or sort of exercises that you can do in developing equity-centered programming is because this model was founded by Creation Rehab. The woman's name is Antoinette Carroll, and she founded this framework post Michael Brown and the protesting that happened then. So I hope you see why I wanted to bring this in, because again, the backdrop of what we're talking about right now and how it is that you're going to be pivoting or expanding your programming is the backdrop that she used to create the model to make it easier, if that makes sense. So again, I'm gonna sort of delve into one aspect of equity-centered programming that we are hearing more about, and in terms of how nonprofits can do better, in creating programming and creating specific activities, co-creating with the community. Because what happens right now is in a lot of different spaces, we go off and we create the programming for our clients, constituents, our community, without involving them in the planning. And so in designing several programs for other nonprofits who receive some of the billions of dollars of funding that is currently out, the thing that was really important in that design is we did a really quick, I don't want to say quick, but we did a really aggressive, I should say, strategy to make sure that we were including and capturing the stories, the thoughts, the ideas, and the opinions of the constituents in the programming. So we were creating avatars, creating stories so that we could then capture that insight, capture that information in the packages, the strategic funding packages that went off to funders. So this is 1/4 of the framework. It's called Co-Create with the Community, and it's moving from just collecting feedback from the community to directly involving them in the process of creating. All right, let's go to the next slide. So my question is to you, and you know what, I'll give this question and I want you to answer in the chat. So co-creating with your community, in fact, if we could go back a slide, co-creating with your community or with the community. How many of you here facilitate community, constituents, clients in your strategic planning on programming? Can you respond in the chat, please?
So we have one of our partners over at Beth Israel Hospital and the RWJ Network says that they have an anchor strategy, which is hire locally, buy, invest locally, with an equity lens and policy outcomes to address racial health disparities.
And so I think RWJ is a benchmark.
Yes,
right?
They
do really well. In fact, I wish, you know what, we had their motto, because they would be the benchmark. I mean, I think this piece is good for, I think, stretching from the current climate, but I know RWJ, because I know the people over there, their strategy is benchmark. So I don't know to what extent they can share, but I think for other, it might be helpful from a framework perspective.
So we can, as Newark 2020 community partner, they have been an amazing partner in our Hire by Live strategy, and they have led a lot of the work in that area, to your point, Dee. Diana Pollard has a comment. She said she surveys, she does community outreach, and she hosts workforce meetings to engage the local community as a part of their planning process.
Awesome. That's exactly it. So that's my point. I knew that probably, you know, some of the people here are already doing this, but know that that was the piece. In fact, the reason I pointed out the co-creating with the community element versus the other elements of equity-centered design is because equity-centered design largely accepted in many spaces. However, the one dispute, or I would say, the one area of sort of friction is the disconnect with the community and that humility piece and the empathy. And so that's why I wanted to point that out. Do I think that that's an area that I think Newark and Newark Alliance and Newark 2020 partners need? I think some of us get it. I think then others of us have an opportunity to learn.
So there was a question about in doing this work, and as folks are leaning into the community and developing with the community, what is the difference between collaborating with the community and creating this framework and them actually being a part of the creation? Because oftentimes folks will go into the community and give a survey, but not necessarily meet with them to hear them and embed them into the process.
Right, so you just answered the question. It's not just the survey, it is engaging. So engaging might be, it's definitely a follow-up to hear more, learn more, right? A sampling of surveying, and even to some extent in those conversations, it's sharing bits and pieces, perhaps broad strokes of programming or of strategy, and having community, constituents, and clients react to it. So yeah, I think I want to leave it there. Does that, I hope I'm answering the question.
Yeah, you did. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you answered part of it. So it's never just a survey. It's never just a questionnaire. For this work, it is important to, we call it press the flesh, right? So engaging and feeling people heart to heart, and not just receiving, but really facilitating a conversation to hear more, learn more. And again, don't forget the piece about when you are designing, it is having the target group, whoever that may be, react. And the reason I say react, because in a lot of instances, you probably are not starting from scratch. You have something, but you want to have something for people to react to and respond to, as to, if we did X, does this serve that need that you shared in the questionnaire, survey, or in this focus group? So that's some of what the model teaches you. Again, it's Antoinette Carroll's model post Michael Brown, and specifically for equity-centered programming after or in racial or during racial unrest. And so then here's the question I'm going to ask now as we move a little further along this conversation, and that is, so does your current programming address some of the key themes? So RWJ Barnabas and this Newark 2020 Live Higher By, right, is powerful work. But I'm going to ask a question not about that kind of programming, live higher by, but my question is, does your programming address civics, voter education, and economic development? That's the question. Does your programming right now address civics, voter education, voter engagement, civic engagement, economic development? I'm sorry, next slide. That's the question. And the reason I'm asking this question is because what we are seeing with our private and public sector right now is the programming that is, I'll say, the priority is around civics, voter education. I think next slide. I'm sorry, next slide. Civics, civic education, voter education, and economic development. And so that is why I'm asking the question, does it? And so if your programming does not address civics, voter education, and economic development, I mean, I think to some extent, while your organization may not necessarily focus on civics or voter education or voter engagement, much of the work that is done in the nonprofit space, in some way, shape, or form, it should touch economic development, right? But this is the question, because this is the priority right now. And so if your programming does not address civics, voter education, economic development, we're going to go to the next slide. Here's the work that we have to do. It is either reviewing your existing programming, revising the programming, expanding programming, or adding new. I'm going to share 2 case studies where the organization, we reviewed the existing program, revised the programming, we expanded the programming, we added new programming, sent it out to the funders, and packaged it in a way that we thought the funders wanted to receive it, and had some feedback that they wanted it to go deeper. And where did they want us to go? They wanted us to go to voting and address racism, systemic racism, voter suppression, and this was a private sector. So again, I want you to think about, does the existing programming address those 3 areas? And if not, you're going to review, revise, expand, or add new. Okay, and so here is the process that we use, next slide, to get to this, this one example that I'm going to share is on March 29th, we began tracking statements from partners, private sector, public sector. What are people talking about right now? What are our funders saying about the current climate and the racial unrest? And what are they saying about where they stand? And so that was the first work, and that would be, and I'm sure you've already done this, but tracking what it is that your partners and prospective partners and funders are saying allows us, right, that's research, allows us to understand what the programming needs are, although we already, right, some of us we know, but we want to validate what the needs are and what they are funding. So that was number one. And then the second was following up with all partners. You know, I have had this conversation with a few nonprofits, and they had yet to reach out to partners, prospective partners, pretty much everybody. And so in this season, and with this unfortunate opportunity that we have, it's unfortunate that a man had to lose his life, and not just a man, but a woman. And so we'll say George Floyd, and I will say the name Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. And so that's how we got here, right? And so while we know a lot of the issues because you've been doing the work, some of the nonprofits had yet to pick up the phone and to check in with partners. And so that created conversation to inform the programming. Does that make sense? It informed the programming. Many of the partners, actually, I'll hold it until I get to the example, but I want to share what their feedback was. So that's number two. And then outreach to the community and to constituents. And so that's where the focus groups, the questionnaires, the surveys, the engagement for how the community, how they're feeling right now, how they're processing what their needs are. Why? Because identifying what the needs are, it helped us to build the programming. And the reason this was important in a lot of conversations, it's because if you have any data that is predated May 25th, I'm not going to go so far to say it's outdated, but it is. Or let's say a nicer way that I could say that, D. Marshall. We're at a different time. And just to give you an example, in corporate America, let's just say for private funding, in corporate America pre-May 25th, the conversation, and I'll just say this, me as a Black woman and you perhaps as a Black person, or you perhaps as let's just say, a Mexican American or Puerto Rican or Cuban American, for us, we were diverse, underrepresented, minorities, we were people of color, we were multicultural. That was before May 25th, right? Post May 25th in corporate America, right? Because I'm anchoring in one source of funding, private funding, right? Post May 25th, I get to be Black. I'm a Black woman. We're talking about racism. We're not talking about people of color. We're not talking about women of color. We're not talking about diversity because I don't know a diverse person. I know Black, I know African American, I know Haitian American, I know Cuban American, I know Puerto Rican, I know Mexican American, I know Portuguese, right? So that's a bucket, and that's the framing. And that's why I wanted to sort of anchor in this in terms of the shift and why the programming has to shift right now. So I hope this is helpful. Can you just plug into the chat? I'm going to keep going with this. So the outreach to the community and partners is just understanding so that you can anchor in on what the needs are right now and what you're hearing right now post May 25th, because anything predated May 25th when we were not able to be, and I'm just going to say we in terms of vulnerable populations and or underrepresented population, we were not allowed to be who we are from a race and ethnicity perspective. We were in a bucket. And so you need the data to make the case for the new programming, and that's how we're going to get it funding, right? And then there was the strategic planning session, and then there was the lobbying our representative. So I'm going to go to the next slide and share with you two examples of programming that with other nonprofits. Now, I hope you could see it. It's a little blurry for me, but I know what it says. So I'm going to just share. So this is an example of a nonprofit we work with. And So, of course, they were one of the organizations that, tons of millions of dollars just offered, just checks written, and so some of the conversation for some of the checks that were written or donate or funds that they received was add this to your existing programming, right? So some were saying just add, you don't need to do anything different, right? And then there were others who said, well, can you expand what you are currently doing? And then there was one or two who came back. Now this is Fortune, again, I'm talking about private sector funding, and private sector who had never wanted or perhaps were not really engaging in things like systemic racism, civic engagement, civic engagement, voter suppression or voter registration or voter education, now came back and said, hey, we like this, we like the programming, but no, you need to go deeper and we need race and we want to tackle the deeper stuff. And so nonprofit president says, okay, that's new, but here's the deal. We can't do this as a one-off. We're not going to work on this for 6 months and then next year you guys change your mind. I hope this is insightful, helpful. If you could post in the chat, it would be great for me to hear if this is insightful, if it's helpful, because again, we're talking about programming and I wanted to just share some specific examples of right now programs that are revamped. So Della, well, I won't impose on the team, but Della, feel free to interrupt if you see any comments or if you hear anything from the team. So what this plan is, and it says at the top, I'll read it in case you can't, in case you can't see it, it says to address longstanding systemic racism, economic, health, and other injustices challenging Black Americans in our nation, XYZ organization will launch Justice and Hope Project by expanding civic engagement, social justice work through constituency-based programs and initiatives listed below, blah, 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 blah. And so what you're seeing on the screen is 3 programs. Now, the organization was already in this work. And so they expanded and they added 1 or 2 new components to their existing programming. And remember, it was because some of the funding, or most of it, I'm going to say 80% of the funding was just put this to whatever it is that you're currently doing, right? And so organization or the funders didn't necessarily want them to do anything different. They didn't want to impose additional work. So for those of you here, how beneficial would it be for you to have just the funding and not have to do anything different or any new programs, right? And so that may be the case that you already have programs that fit with the current climate and the current issues. And so then that just becomes a conversation about going back to partners to say, hey, here's our problem, right? Post May 25th, and to deal with this racial injustice, here's our programming. This is really the answer. Would you now fund? Or here we are expanding, and would you now fund this? So from left to right, the 3 programmings are women and girls, leadership and economic empowerment, right? Because that has to do with systemic racism to an extent in terms of economic empowerment. That's the conversation right now of where a lot of funding in the bucket number 3 is economic empowerment, where bucket 2 or 1 and 2 is around voter suppression, voter registration, voter education, civics, and so on and so forth. So this is economic empowerment, goal to empower, women and girls with training tools, resources. That's the goal of the program. How does it tie into social justice? Address economic, health, wealth disparities to increase social economic status of Black women and girls. Partner value. So what's the value back to the funders? Right, this is more private funding language, perhaps. Social impact, it ties to consumer engagement. It ties to diversity and inclusion, access to market, supplier diversity, sourcing, and recruiting. Here's why I point this out for you, because I think the partner value and the significance of tapping into other areas of interest for stakeholders, it's important for sustainable funding beyond the moment. So right now, the funding for for many organizations, let's just say the funding is coming out of social impact, but the new line item is racial and social justice, right? From private sector funding. So, and those are some of the funders of the folks here, right? But it's important to identify where is there additional value, because if, come 2021 or December 2021, when the programming is over, and then what happens when you've had millions of dollars and to fund programming, and then no longer have that. So the partner value is significant. And then of course the outcomes, whatever that might be, in some instances, it's not just about training and online. Some of the private funding is, funders want to see movement, and they want to see, engagement beyond building online and converting to virtual. So let me just say a bit about that. So some of the thoughts about programming right now, because we are canceled for through the end of the year. So it's like, well, how do we create programming and not be at risk? And so the thought was just convert everything to virtual. And so that worked for some, but not for all. And so think really about the funding and the programming that you currently have, and are there limits on, how it is to be executed? Because then there is the need to identify other ways to deliver, but don't just assume it's virtual. I will say for some of the delivery of the programming, it's building out online campuses or online communities to be able to do things like civic engagement, voter education. In terms of things like voter, let's just say, well, you know what? I'll take out voter. I'll just say other programming. So technology, so building out technology and apps to engage. Why do I bring that up? Because that's a hot item right now in this season, because again, the conversation and the funding and the programming, a lot of it is to move from protesting to the polls. So just so you know, that's the conversation. Move the protest to the poll. And so how does your programming then support, building and creating and establishing an inclusive, not just an inclusive culture, but an inclusive world, right? Or an inclusive country, let's just say. So again, so that's an example of Women and Girls Program. Number 2, in case you can't see it, it says Arts and Cultural Expression. So this was a new program. So utilizing arts and entertainment to bring together multiracial, multi-generation, coalition to address racial understanding, healing, and reconciliation. And so that was the goal, the social justice connect, or the framing, really to fuel the reimagining of American values. Now, I will tell you for this, we tweaked this, I think the original one, because the partner value, it ties to social impact, corporate and social responsibility. But what happened with, I think, one of the funders is when, arts and cultural expression was not the right language and not the right framing. And so, so it was worth a try, but it just had to be reframed. And so what this is it's cultural competency. So we changed this. So I hope this is helpful in terms of the framing of the language and what it is that the programming needs to include in order to, I think, to make sense with regard to funding. Cultural competency is, you're not going to get pushback on cultural competency, because let me just back up from a D&I perspective, which is the work that we do the most. So we work with private sector, Fortune 500 corporations. And so we talk about the D&I bucket, right? For diversity and inclusion, a lot of corporations, depending on where they are along the diversity continuum, they start here at this unconscious bias training, right? And a lot of the effort and the work is around unconscious bias. However, there's 4 additional, at minimum, there's 4 additional buckets. There's 4 additional pieces to the puzzle. And so it's not just unconscious bias. So that might be number 1. The second bucket is, the real issue is there's a lack of cultural competence. And so programming should tie in culture. If it does, then you're less likely to get pushback. Why? Because right now, if your programming is targeted to, and I'm just gonna say, you know, Black people right now, because again, the framing and the opportunity right now, rightfully so, is a response to what's happening and racism against Black people in America, right? So the framing of cultural competence, right? You're educating people about Black people. Right now, everybody's open to education and listening and hearing. Now, you all may not be, because you know this, right? But your funders and the people who are looking to play and participate with you, they are looking to be allies, but they need to have a level of awareness. That might be the bias, but they need to have a level of education. Is this making sense? So cultural competence is how we reframe this programming. I hope that's helpful. So in your programming, because we're talking about equity-centered programming, we're talking about there is a framework, and then we're talking about you could do a model that is comparable to what you do now and still come up or come out on top with regard to framing or with regard to programming. So that's the second column you see here. The third column, it says social justice and institution building. So this is an expansion of this nonprofit and their programming. And it says the goal is to establish a social justice institute to amplify their work. And just to give you some ideas, you know, thinking about establishing establishing, or let's just say partnering with a local university, or maybe it's not a local university, maybe it's a historical Black college, right? An HBCU. Again, that's depending on if your programming is there. But what I'm sharing with you is, again, all within current, where we are currently from a racial perspective, racism in America against Black people. So I hope that's helpful. That's the framing. It is very specific. It's very right now. It's very much about what do you do right now. So expanding and partnering with an HBCU. And then in terms of the social justice connection, and forgive me for all of you who are, you know this, you know, at the 10th degree, you have more than 10,000 hours. But for those of us here who may not be as familiar, the social justice piece is to achieve full participation in barrier-free democratic process, right? And so that's an idea of expanding programming, right? And then the partner value is, this ties into corporate and social responsibility. Of course, there's a narrative, there's a full page strategic plan that attaches to this, but I wanted to share with you just the top line. But this attaches to corporate and social responsibility, consumer engagement, and so let me just say a little bit more about this and where there is still, I'll say, yeah, value for the partners. It's not just that their funding will fund and support the expansion of racial and social justice work and racial and social justice programming, but it does matter if there are if there's additional ROI. It doesn't matter right now, but it'll matter at the end of the year. And so that's why it's built here. It doesn't matter. They will say, no, not necessary right now, but you want to build into the programming something that attaches to consumer engagement. So if you're building an institute, let's just say, just for example, right, you're engaging consumers, and there's a lot more opportunity to do things when you're engaging a partner's consumers, right? Because you have access to market, and then you can certainly offer that to your funders. Branding. You know, so we've seen some big corporations say, nope, we don't need anything. And then others have made public announcements so that even if we wanted it to be private, it couldn't be, because they made and that's part of what they need to do. And so branding is a big deal. I think diversity and inclusion is certainly, you know, big ROI. And actually, it's to your benefit that if you have an opportunity to create program for pipeline, right? And so that could be pipeline development. It could be that you are a recruiting or a sourcing partner. It could be that you are the partner who partners with the funder, and then you partner with an institution to provide job opportunities. So right, you're the bridge, right? That's that private-public partnership. I hope this is helpful. Please share in the chat. And then, supplier diversity. So for one of our clients, I said if there's economic empowerment, leadership development training, and a programming around entrepreneurship, then for some of these private funders, that's a track to supply chain. So that taps into supplier diversity. Okay. And then I'm going to go down here to, expected outcome. I think, I don't need to go through that, but I think what was important is the social justice pieces, and then the partner value. And I wanted to give an example. Let's go to the next slide. And so here are the three pieces I think that are important, is to look at when you're co-creating, the best practice is, it's whoever it is that you have working within the organization. They are both they're serving in a dual role. They are both your constituent, your client, and they're part of the team. And so, many, or some, I should say some, nonprofit organizations may not think about how they engage formally people at lower levels of an organization to gain insight in terms of programming ideas. So that's a best practice now. Clients, of course, clients and partners, or I should say clients, whoever it is that you're serving, and we talked about at the beginning, and then the funders. It's having those conversations and outreach as an intentional strategy. As far as I'm concerned, every funder, everyone who has ever supported your organization or institution, you should have had a conversation by now. And if not, then maybe that's a takeaway, is to have a conversation, because most organizations and funders are looking for something to fund. They're looking to be part of something and to create impact, right? They are looking to do better. They want to do better. And so where there is, I'm going to say, money left on the table and opportunity left on the table, is when we fail to pick up the phone and have conversations. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. I'm going to give you one more program. And this is, again, this is a right now program, and equity-centered programming that we are working on with another nonprofit. And so for this particular client, they are tasked with voter registration, voter suppression. That's what they're tasked with. I'm just trying to say this loosely in terms of the work that they're doing. And so multi-billion, to be quite honest, they're one of many. And so the programming to move people of faith, Black people in particular, to the polls. That's the initiative, loosely, that's the initiative. And so our task at Diverse and Engage is to mobilize, and we created this programming. It's 1,000 YPs, and YPs are young pastors. They are senior pastors, gatekeepers of the community, and where you can reach, of course, the community. And so this is an example of programming, and it has to do, again, with not just civics, but really the voter piece. So I hope this is helpful. I wanted to share that just as another example, because if you go to the next slide, again, the reason I want to share the protest is because the protest, you have to move from protest to, you have to move people to the poll. And so again, that's where there's a lot of opportunity, and that's where you have equity-centered programming. Now, I understand that you're probably thinking, well, if my nonprofit, if we don't do that, like that's so far from what we do, then it would be thinking about a way to include it, or expand a program, or to create a program if it's nothing other than civic education, right? Civics engagement, education. Because again, how we are going to dismantle systemic racism is at the polls. Like, certainly there's programming, there's lots of other things that you can do, but one of the most powerful is to make sure that you are able to rally and mobilize your community, your people, even the people who work with you right now, who are having conversations of, the protests and racism. It's how are you having that conversation and then moving people to something meaningful. And so while we're talking about in the formal sense in terms of programming, but also know that in the informal sense, all of the movement has to go to empowering people, first of all, motivating people, mobilizing them, and then empowering them, encouraging them to move their protests, whether they are out on the front lines or they are at home and having conversation and protesting in other ways, but to move them to the polls. So I wanted to share that case study number 2, or not case study, but an example of another program that is happening right now, and it's equity-centered programming. So again, next slide. So the top 4, I would say, where there is opportunity for funding and equity-centered programming is it should be something around civic engagement, voter education, voter registration or engagement, and then economic development, which again, I think is the bucket where so many already are. It's just making the case and revisiting and revamping or revising your existing programs. So you see this language of like voter education, voter registration, and voter engagement, civic engagement. It's because, again, for a lot of the new opportunities for funding, a lot of those new opportunities, depending on where they are coming from, would determine the language and the programming where they are most comfortable. Again, before May 25th, a lot of private funding, or I should say some private funding, private sector, they would not touch this, right? And that's what I hear from our nonprofit partners and our clients. They would say, nope, our programming, we can't send that. So they have public sector funding, government funding, and then they have the private sector. So again, this just depends on where and who your funding source is. So Della, are we seeing any comments or questions? So again, I think if I had to top line, what should the takeaway be? And the takeaway should be to review your current programming and either revise it, revamp it altogether, or expand it now. That's the takeaway. It's because there is opportunity now and there is funding now that did not exist before May 25th. And again, as I mentioned, May 25th, the day that, God rest his soul, George Floyd lost his life. It's an unfortunate circumstance, but this is a pivotal moment in history that has never before existed in terms of the doors and the floodgates being open right now, and being open to what was previously unacceptable. Again, I'll go back to my own, story as a business owner. I happen to be Black, if you're watching on screen. I happen to be a woman. And so I was never allowed to be a Black woman when I'm working with my corporate clients. No, you can't be you're a diverse, right? Diverse supplier. I am an MWBE, so I'm a minority women business enterprise. That's how they would classify me. I'm a women business enterprise. So for you, I want you to think about that in your programming, and think about you and how you are framing and what you were not allowed, or what was not acceptable, right? What was not acceptable before May 25th, and then after May 25th, or in the current space. So this is about you reviewing, revamping your existing programming to solve the problem. You are the problem solver. You are the solution. And so I'll give you another example. It's not here on the slide. Your ideas right now, it's not even a program. Your idea is welcomed right now. Someone at some funding source or some organization right now, they have a line item. They want to do better, right? This is to I like to say my white brothers and sisters. I said that one time and I got good feedback, and they were all, warm and fuzzy. And I like, you know what? I'm going to continue to say. So there is some. And again, let me back up and frame this. This is not a Black-white conversation. This is a everyone versus systemic racism, white supremacy, right? But I think you get my point. So you get my point. I'm not going to belabor it. So, but I was framing that there is an opportunity and there's a need right now. So the third example was, you know, just an idea. You know, I just had an idea, and I ran it by one of our advisors who happens to be a corporate executive. It was a conversation. It was a 2-minute, 5-minute conversation, and she said, "Oh, that's a great idea." And oh, you should partner with this organization. So again, then there's a nonprofit, right? So that's why you're it, right? They're looking for you. They're not looking for profit. They're looking for you, right? We just help you then to do better. So she says, if you partner with this one, oh yeah, you should do that. That makes sense, right? Women impacting public policy, because there's an advocacy piece. And she said, and then I could fund that. She said, out of my racial and social justice budget line item. It was an idea. So I share that with you to say your ideas are valid. In fact, I'll say this for you, executive director, you CEO, somebody on your team, one of your clients, your constituents, your employees, a family member, somebody has an idea. And so that's why if I could go back, we don't need to go back to the slides, but when I said talking and having those conversations and getting a sense of what other people are thinking, how they're framing and what ideas they have about fixing solutions is how you're going to frame your programming and validate it, right? And so she said, yep, I'll fund that out of our racial and social justice budget. So there's a separate line item that didn't exist before now. Okay, so, and let me see, that programming, I was gonna share this with you. So that program, and I'm tying it back to you, it is specifically me and my tribe, if you will, as a voice for Black women business owners. Why do I share this with you? Because each of us has a role to be a voice and an advocate for our space. So if we are advocating as a Black woman-owned business, you as a Hispanic or Black, right? Think about what you're seeing and what you were not allowed to do. That becomes the framing for your idea. That becomes the content for your program. And so what I said is there's never before this have Black women been able to be Black in a business owner in corporate America. I fall in a bucket, right? I fall in a bucket with lots of others. And so now we want to be a voice. And we created a program to help close the disparity, address the systemic racism and the disparity gap. So I'm going to give that to you as an example. Probably when we have our follow-up session, it'll be public and I'll be able to share as an example, because it's an example of an idea right now in this climate of how we can become part of the solution, or who doesn't have a voice and who do we need to really advocate for. And then it becomes an idea to a programming and it's literally a solution for a funder. Because the funder is looking for something. And so for some of you, it may just be sending what you currently have that you're doing that's already amazing. You already have the solution. And then for others, it's going to be, yep, we have this solution already, but you're going to reframe it, repackage it, you're going to rename it. It's 2020, we're coming to fiscal, right? And so for your 2021, whatever you choose to call it, programming, here's how we want to be part of the solution, and will you fund us? So again, so for equity, I hope this is helpful in terms of equity-centered programming, and we are just about at the end. And so, yeah, so when, I have to think about how do you do this? Like how do you dismantle? How do you become part of the solution? Let's go to the next slide. And this is going to seem redundant. It is how to fill in the blank, right? How do you address the current climate? How do you address racism, systemic racism? How do you address white supremacy for when it comes to underrepresented individuals? It's civics. It's educating people about how the systems work and how the systems are designed and how the government works is what we say is the first place to start, right? If we were having a D&I conversation, this would be awareness, right, of, it's going to be awareness and cultural competency. That's where we start. Awareness, in general, cultural competency and bias, right? By the way, I didn't share those others along the track. And so on that D&I continuum, it's unconscious bias. There is cultural competence. And then there is, we do managing inclusion, becoming an ally. And then there is becoming a champion, diversity and inclusion champion, right? So we do programming there. That's specifically for high-level executives, so that the weight doesn't fall on this one person and this one small team who's responsible for diversity and inclusion, right? So those are all of the buckets. But again, when it comes to public sector and the nonprofit work, and then the community that we're serving, this is about civics, civic engagement, and voter education, right? Is what we can do. But then it's also about, run for public office. That's how you do it. You run for an office. And if you're not cut out for that work, support others running for office. So whether you are volunteering, maybe you commit for, for the next year, or for the next 4 years, perhaps, to supporting somebody, to latching, or to something that really speaks to you. Or maybe it's you prepare yourself to run for some sort of public office. And so, last thing I will share. So diverse and engage. We started an initiative, a couple of initiatives. In fact, let me just back up for a second. So the work that we do at Diverse and Engage, we have two verticals. So we work with Fortune 500 corporations, and then we work with small business and nonprofit organizations over here. And the reason we have these two verticals is because they really are, there's a connect, right? There's a connect. And so, but last year, because we live at the intersection of, business and Fortune 500 space, and then the public sector, we launched an initiative called Diversity on the Hill. Why did we launch that? That's a program, right? Because we wanted to invite and empower people to do three things. We wanted to first empower them, educate, and mobilize them to visit their representatives and to support the representative, and also to hold the representatives accountable. It's called Diversity on the Hill. Why? Because we found that not many people were doing that. And so for our folks and the people that you are serving, we start as civic engagement. It is no longer structured programming in schools. It hasn't been forever. And so Diversity on the Hill is specifically to engage people in the off season, engage our community who don't understand how these things work. And so I'll always start with civic engagement, but that Diversity on the Hill, and then another initiative, which is programming, D&I honors, right? Where Congress meets culture, inclusion, and belonging. So we started that initiative to help close the gap, right? Because public sector and private sector not talking to each other. So these are programs. So I want you to be thinking about the programming. So when we get to our strategy session, you already have ideas. The ideas aren't going to come from me per se. It's going to come from you and your community and who you're serving. And so that D&I honors is important, Diversity on the Hill, important. And then even, we started another initiative, but I want to pause here and say, so today I got an email. So I plug into this app. Are you all familiar with Countable? It's an online app. Can we go to the last slide? And so, oh no, I'm sorry. You can go back to the next slide. Go back. Yep, right here. So today, yep, nope, that one right there. So Countable is an app, really awesome resource. And we have some resources that we're going to share. It's an awesome resource for helping, I think, in terms of civic engagement and civic awareness and such. And so it's an app where you can directly send your representative an email. So you can directly send an email, and you can comment, and you can share, and you can advocate for your own interests and your people. I'm getting the wrap up sign, so we're going to stop here. And so I just wanted you to write down Countable. I got this email this morning, and it gave me the notice that what my representatives are voting on. So I know. So this is an example where we're at time, but I wanted you to see this. I got an email and a text message to let me know what is happening on Capitol Hill. And so I hope this helps for the civics piece. And as a resource, I think we have one last slide. I'm not going to talk, Della. I see you. Can you just advance to that last slide and you'll see how the app works? So go back. When you go into this app and you put in your zip code, go back right here. When you go in and you put in your zip code, it will pull up your 3 representatives. It has Senator Booker, Menendez, and Payne, and you can engage. So I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to show you this tool. And so whatever it is that you're thinking in terms of programming, how you might use this, how you might create something, I wanted to give you an example. So that's my time. And so if you could put up the last slide with my information, that would be great. And then Della, I see you coming in. So if anybody has any questions, although Newark Alliance has made way for us to facilitate another session. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. So let's talk about that. So all of our Newark 2020 partners will have the honor and benefit of working with Dee Marshall in a facilitated in the month of July. So our community workforce hubs and our community partners get ready for that. We will send out information about that. One of the things I want to just speak briefly to, Dee, before you leave, there were 2 points that came through for us. The first is a question, the second is about training providers. So someone asked, when do you determine whether it's a burden, whether it's our role as African Americans and as African American women to champion this cause, to push this out, and when is it a burden, and how do you teeter that line and knowing, you know, when you should be speaking up and when you should, and when our allies should be doing some of that work?
So I think it's a good question if I understand it's, and so the question is, if I'm a Black woman, how do I know when I should be speaking up and when it might be a burden or when it's somebody else's place to speak up, right? Is that the question?
Yes, when to be an ambassador for your race. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I do, it's a good question. So I will say, when and where there is a problem, and it's a problem that is affecting you and your people, and there is no solution in sight, I think it is appropriate to offer solution, to think about how you become part of the solution, not force it, right? So this is just a general, like if I use the example of me advocating for Black women, right? So I'm not part of an organization. So it was, again, it's a space where I'm in. I felt led to advocate for Black women because I know the situation. There is nobody working on this. And I felt led to do that. There's a gap here. Somebody needs to take the lead in this, or because if nobody says anything, we're going to lose in this. Because then next year will be too late to have a conversation about Black women in business. So that's one example. I'll give you another example. In the corporate setting where there is systemic racism and there are clearly problems, and the problems are not Black people problems. They are majority problems, let's just say. It is the responsibility of the majority to fix the problem. So depending on if you are within a corporate structure or an infrastructure where you are underrepresented, it's the majority's responsibility. So I'm going to make this up. I'm going to say if it's white women, who's the majority, it's their responsibility to fix the white people problem. And I don't say that, and I hope that's not offensive, but that's the language that we're talking really open and lovingly. This systemic racism, let's just say in a corporate structure, because I don't know from what angle she's asking, but in a corporate structure or you're part of an organization and there's racism there, as a Black woman, that's not my responsibility. It's not your responsibility to fix it. It's the majority. Okay, so these are different areas. If you are a nonprofit leader in the community and you have responsibility for these constituents, or you say you serve these constituents, then I think it's appropriate to look at the constituents or the clients, let's say the clients that you serve. And in this season, as it pertains to systemic racism, look at your clients, what you're hearing, and wait, in our space, is it a space? Is this something that we could take on and that we should? So I've given you 3 examples. Is that helpful?
That is so helpful. And I think our training and workforce providers on the phone key into that. What can we do? What should we do? You know, sometimes as training providers, especially as nonprofits, we try to hop in a little bit of everything, but think about what you can do well. You may be only able to do the voter education well. So pick that as one of your levers and do that. So thank you for bringing that up. The other point I wanted to just bring to the forefront for our training providers is it is our responsibility, and I'm going to close with this, everybody. It's our responsibility to level up our services, to level up our offer as we're working with our own, you know, with our constituents in our urban communities, because most of us on the line service urban communities. When we are working with them, we have to expect the best. We can't offer them just the entry level positions. You know, we're a workforce program. Let's challenge them to train up, challenge them to move beyond. Let's challenge them to level up so that we can close the divide. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, yep. And I will say, I will add to that and say, it's more important to level up how we engage with our staff, our team, our clients, because right now, if the protesting and the battle is against others for fair and equal, or, you know, I'll say everything, then there's now going to be a sensitivity to a nonprofit or any organization who looks down on or doesn't treat. And I'm going to give you this one example. It's a painful one, but it's in the public domain right now. 2 days ago, an article went out against a Black institution that is the heart of Black women everywhere. And it called out every piece of, I'm going to say, what looks like, if there were white people in that organization, it would look like racism, sexism, white supremacy in the organization, except they were all Black people. And the framing of it was the view of how Black people in this institution were mimicking what learned behavior from white institutions. Why do I share that as we close? Because Della, you hit the nail on the head in our community, communities of color, underrepresented, they deserve better all the way around. So as Black people, we have to step up and make sure we're serving, we're respectful, because we can't expect, right, to hold now white America, or let's say white supremacist America, accountable to how they handle us, and then we not treat each other well. So I just wanted to co-sign what you shared. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for staying with us and for joining us. If this is your first time logging on for the Newark 2020 Closing the Digital Divide. Up next, we will have some phenomenal speakers, and we'll be really talking about what is virtual agility and how do we close the technical divide. So this segment is 3-part. There's the virtual agility, recruitment and engagement, and you will have Lorene up first. And so during this pandemic, the entire recruitment process has shifted to a digital format, which can often make interactions feel impersonal and harder for employers and candidates to communicate effectively. And so we have brought Lorene DeLance, MPA from she's a higher educational professional from King University and is the Assistant Director of Internships at King University. Lorene is responsible for the creation of a streamlined automated system that tracks data on internships earned for academic credit as well as non-credit bearing internships. She develops program standards to ensure high quality internship opportunities are afforded to students. Help me welcome and celebrate Lorene.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, LaToya. So as LaToya shared, I am the Assistant Director of Internships at Kane University. I have definitely worked on, developing relationships with employer partners while also making sure I prepare students for experiential learning opportunities. So I am so glad and honored to be here to have a conversation with you. So let's begin. All right, next slide. All right, and we'll keep going. Okay, so we are going to talk about both engagement and recruitment in the digital age. At this point in time, we definitely have to recognize we are working in the 21st century workforce. I'll get into that a little later as far as what I mean by 21st century workforce. But for 30 seconds, I'll give you a nutshell about just who I am in general. So, born and raised in New Jersey, definitely have a passion for leadership and career development, have worked in career development and workforce development for a little over 10 years. Ultimately, I enjoy helping organizations, small, mid-scale businesses create experiential learning opportunities while also helping them understand the importance of building a strong digital presence. So that in a nutshell, and I think in 30 seconds, is a little bit about me. So with that said, let's talk about maximizing recruitment. So as LaToya basically hinted to, it's so important in this day and age to really think about how are we maximizing recruitment processes to really continue building diversity amongst companies and organizations, and B, how to make sure that our workforce is ready for that 21st century workflow. And when I emphasize 21st century, we're looking at the century of automation, the century of using technology, of that being embedded in so many pieces of the workforce, to the point where we are going to have to begin to evaluate the type of skills that we have and if there is room for reskilling and upskilling. And that I'll get into a little later. But first, let's talk about maximizing recruitment. So the first point that you want to do as an employer, as a company, as an organization looking to enhance and amplify your workforce is building that digital presence. I mean, with this current state that we're in, with us having to deal with the global pandemic of COVID-19, we are realizing how we had to shift. Some of us were forced to shift. Some of our companies have already begun really incorporating remote and virtual work into our daily workforce. But at this point in time, understanding the importance of building your digital presence, whether it's beginning to create social media platforms, Facebook for long form content, LinkedIn for long form professional content, Twitter for bite-sized information about your organization, Instagram to show the visual brand of your company. You want to begin incorporating that into your workforce. If you don't have someone on the team, I will actually be surprised, because social media and just the utilization of social media is something that's embedded in a lot of us, because we picked it up because that's what came out. That's what came out for us to really just put ourselves out there, right? There was a point in time, it was Facebook that was the reigning social media platform. We knew to update our albums. We knew to post a status about something that we're doing. And all of that was, in a way, marketing ourselves. So adjusting and pivoting to actually market and really articulate your organization's mission and vision statement, this is really the time to be able to do that. And you also want to think about blogging and having a community forum. Again, I guarantee you that you actually have somebody on your team who enjoys doing that. So even though you may not necessarily have a designated social media manager, marketing manager, communications or digital communications manager, I guarantee you can find a member on your team who has a knack for this, who can actually be taught how to tweak this for the business and for the organization, and really designate them as that person, that go-to person for social media and digital communications. And then you also want to create a professional profile on LinkedIn. More and more companies are realizing, especially during the period of the global pandemic, this is the time to really engage their audience. So posting content and perhaps have a theme. And I'll give a prime example. So prior to me actually being at Kane University, I was the Deputy Director of Programs for a nonprofit called Leadership Newark. At that time, when I started, Leadership Newark had a social media page, which was Facebook and Twitter. And Facebook and Twitter were a little underutilized. However, when I came in, I saw that there was potential, because this is one of the strategies we can even use to engage participants who have come and gone through our program and who are 10 years out of the program. How do we engage them? Let's use that digital presence. So what are some content that would be appealing to our alums? And that's what we call them, alumni. What would be content that they would want to know? The focus of Leadership Newark was public policy and leadership. So what kind of content can we consistently put out to ensure that they stay engaged with what's going on with Leadership Newark, and they stay engaged with all the policy affairs that are happening within Newark and even the United States as a whole? So moving along, you also want to make sure, just go right back. So when you actually are maximizing your recruitment processes, you also want to think about intentional recruitment and community partnerships. And I'm pretty sure that most people have that designated person on their team, that being the talent acquisition partner, the human resource manager. But if you're a small entity, it might just be the CEO or the chief operating officer. So there has been, some statements that are often been repeated by some human resource manager that it's hard to find diverse talent. They don't know where the talent is, or there's just a disconnect. There really isn't enough people to really stand out and be that ideal chief financial officer. And sometimes you question, well, where are you looking? If you're looking in the same place or doing the same thing where that same process is not recognizing diverse outlets to find talent, that's going to be a challenge. So you want to connect with HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, PBIs, predominantly Black institutions in your area. An example would be Bloomfield College. Take a look at top diverse colleges and universities. As someone at Kane University, we are a university that's in the top 5 for diversity in the nation. Right? So looking at the U.S. News World Report and similar information, similar content, you want to go into those outlets to look for talent and avenues to find great talent. Look into diversity councils like the American Conference on Diversity. They can actually give you the outlet to find continuous talent. And last but surely not least, professional associations. You have the National Association of Black Accountants, which houses accountants who are versed in governmental accounting, CPA, and the like. So if you're looking for that type of person, tap into those professional associations. You have NOMA, the National Organization of Minority Accountants, and NAAHP, which is the National Association for the Advancement of Haitian Professionals. So again, it's really looking at these various outlets. And then also internships and experiential learning programs. At this point in time, many employers are beginning to see that internships are really the new interview, because when you actually incorporate an internship program into your workforce, you really are beginning to acclimate young talent, fresh talent, to really get used to the world of work, and more specifically, the world of work and the world of your culture. So instead of having to use those traditional formats like the Indeeds.com, the Simply Hireds, you can actually tap into internship programs at colleges and universities. Tap into the career services. Yes, this is a shameless plug with me being a career service professional, but if you are really looking for fresh talent, tap into your local community colleges, your universities, and general colleges in general. And then tap into your local community's summer youth employment programs, or perhaps there are some workforce development programs that they have. You can tap into them, look for quality talent, and there you have it in increasing the diversity in your workflow. And then honestly, when you are maximizing your recruitment, the key thing too is to maintain transparency. So making sure that the candidates know your core values is going to be key. Let's go into engaging talent. And that's something so critical, especially in this day and age. You know, with all that has been happening around the world with the injustices, and with the injustice really actually being filmed on camera now, right? Because in a way it has been there and now it's just being documented and we're seeing it on a visual basis. You want to find a way to let people who are working in your workforce, in your company, in your organization that may be impacted by this, let them know that you care. You know, mental health for, you know, a diverse group of people has been something that has been hard and taboo. And now we have to embrace it as something critical to employee engagement and productivity. There are a lot of statistics on that, so definitely incorporate checking in and a culture that embraces the diversity. You want to think about a variety of team building activities. So right now, again, we're seeing so many issues around injustice, racial issues, and inequity. So set up something like a BLM night, a Black Lives Matter night. Perhaps show a few movies per week. Let's say this week is going to be on 13th, and you talk about the amendment, the specific policies around that, and how that's impacting us in this day and age. Think about social responsibility. We have top companies like Prudential, Panasonic that have corporate social responsibility embedded in their workforce. Think about how you can incorporate community service so that your workforce can feel that they're making an impact and they're being valued. And then, of course, I can't emphasize enough transparency and creating a safe space. So have a town hall, and it's not just asking how you're doing, it's checking in, it's letting them know that they are part of the fabric of the company. You know, think of affinity groups. Perhaps you may want to think about building diverse affinity groups like Time Warner, for example. And yes, that is a large company. So if you're not necessarily a large corporate company, that might be a bit challenging. But Time has an affinity group called BEAT, Black Employees at Time Warner. They actually create programs on a monthly basis where they bring in a panel of different HR executives to just talk about corporate trauma that actually happens to Black employees or other employees of color. So think of ways that you can address racial equity, diversity, and social issues. And then also think about professional development. We never stop learning. Learning doesn't stop from the K to 16 realm where we are going somewhere and being assigned homework to do. How can we continue learning and being competitive? How can you upskill versus reskill employees that perhaps were used to a process that was considered blue collar, you know, something practical that we could definitely have a lucrative life, but now with automation, potential jobs are being lost. How can you reskill people with new skills and talent? And how can you upskill them to perhaps become more tech savvy? And then recognize where there's some technological and digital divides and inequity. Sometimes the reason why someone may not necessarily be so versed is because they may not have the resources. So as the employer, what are you providing so that that solid, satisfactory employee that goes above and beyond to do the job and meet the demands of your job, what can you do to ensure that they move along in the progress of your organization? Let's move along. And basically, I wanted to leave you with a couple of areas for recruiting and engaging diversity. So, of course, there are numerous ones, but I want to emphasize Diversity Inc. I believe we had the CEO earlier today, if not later on, to talk about, you know, various components of diversity in the workforce. So take a look at the article, subscribe to their newsletter so you can constantly get their information. It's extremely resourceful. The Society for Human Resource Management is a great outlet to create better workplaces. It gives you best practices in, you know, long form content, but engaging content. take a look at the National Association of Colleges and Employers. It's the information source that allows you to see resources forecasting job market statistics for college educated employees. So you can know how to engage colleges, career services, career counselors to help create a better understanding of what you as an employer need from fresh entry-level candidates and even seasoned candidates. And then lastly, the Harvard Business Review. I mean, in a nutshell, it's a great library of insight and best practices, and this would lead to effective, positive productivity in your workforce. So you can screenshot this and, use this to your advantage. Next slide.
Oh, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Lorene, for sharing. And you're so right. One of the things that stuck out really for me was transparency. And, in the time that we're in, it's required companies to lean in differently than they have before and to have transparent conversation. It's not easy, but it's necessary.
Absolutely.
And so thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And so as we continue to transition through virtual agility, we have the honor of being able to have 3 gentlemen come and speak about virtual HR tools and training techniques. And our first speaker, so as we cue them to speak, you're talking about, okay, you're hired, you're new employees, and now it's time for training. What can be a daunting task? Which can be a daunting task? So this session that we're going to have with David Lipsky, Chris Ronzio, and Sam Cauchi is really talking through how do we introduce platforms, tools, and resources to help ensure that your new employees are properly trained and well equipped to succeed at your organization. So without further delay, David Lipsky is our first speaker, PhD. I don't want to forget that because he worked hard for that. So Dr. David Lipsky is the head coach at Samsung. And he has been there for over 20 years of expertise in building organizational and leadership capabilities that contribute to sustainable business success. He has accomplished this by focusing on the diverse potential and possibilities of the people and businesses he has worked with, and by utilizing his broad experience in strategic alignment, leadership development, and organizational transformation and sustainability. Audience, let's give Dr. David Lipsky a hand and welcome him to the stage.
Thank you so much, LaToya. I appreciate that introduction, and especially the reference to the degree, which I don't get a lot, but I'm going to mention it to my mom because she suffered through a lot of that, as well as my family. Very excited to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. I will be the least technological of the group today. So the focus is on virtual agility, virtual HR tools, and training techniques. And to the last speaker is a great question. How do we close the divide is one of the questions that I struggle with every day. So if you can go to the next slide. So just a question, what do you see in that picture? So I've been using this on some virtual training sessions, and had a challenge a few weeks ago, got invited to do a walk to remember. So if folks know this organization out of Rutgers, we do a volunteer thing each year, and we go for a physical walk, but we couldn't go for a physical walk this year. So for this year, what I did is I tracked my walk. So if you can go to the next slide, you'll see what my walk actually was. So I just mowed the lawn and did the walk, put the steps in. But part of the reason I'm sharing it with you is what we've been finding is while COVID has created many challenges to connect with people and for people to bring their whole selves to work, it's also provided some opportunities for us to share some things that we maybe haven't created a comfortable environment for people to bring. So if you go to the next slide, I wanted to share with you some of the things that we've been learning, right? So it's really quick adjustments over the last 3.5, 4 months now. And what we've noticed is we started out with challenges where we moved all of our training from the physical training, and Samsung is a very much an in-person culture. So I'm used to traveling about 50% of my time, both in the US and globally. And then when we suddenly flipped the switch and we had to do things virtually, we first noticed that we had bandwidth challenges. In terms of people didn't necessarily have the bandwidth, didn't have the equipment, didn't have the ability to connect. And then I also started thinking about what other things get in the way of connection, right? Not just technology or Wi-Fi, but there's also people with. So on the right-hand side is a picture of my puppy, Max. And Max, every once in a while, comes in a room and starts barking, right? So we first were like, all right, how do we prevent this from happening? But then we recognized we can embrace it in a different way. How about if we actually invite people in orientations to introduce us to somebody in their home, a pet, a family member, and it started opening things up. And then on the left-hand side, life with, right, is people have a lot of stuff going on. People are struggling with educating children in their home. They're struggling with parents. That's a picture of my dad, who didn't have a haircut for about 3.5 months, grew a full beard, and I went to his house to cut his hair this weekend. But these are the kind of things we're inviting people to share to increase that level of engagement. So if you go to the next slide, and this is the last slide. What do you do with these learnings, and how do we increase people's experience? So one of the things we've been trying is, this is such an important time for people to focus in on purpose, right? How do you get people to focus in on purpose? Give them an assignment. It's amazing what people will do, right? Share what are some of the values that are important to you. Share a picture of what that looks like. Share if you had a leadership walk-on song like baseball, what's the song that inspires you and why does it inspire you? Share it with the group. So just getting people to share those things is something that we've been doing on a lot of our orientation sessions or leadership sessions. Appreciation is, we need to turn up the dial on appreciating others. This is a picture of Max and Lizzie, my two puppies. They have their own Instagram, Max and Lizzie, Advice for Humans. Not that I'm advertising, just a hobby. But we need to appreciate people for not just what they do at work. We need to appreciate them for their very rich and interesting lives and stories. And then the last one is connection. I just started taking some pictures of some of the conferences I've been on, and I've noticed that, wow, it's amazing how I've been able to connect with people from so many different locations that I actually couldn't physically travel to as quickly as I did. And how do we increase that connection across the organization? So with that, I want to leave time for the other speakers. I'm so excited to be here. If you have any questions, please feel free, as LaToya said, put it in the chat, and we will get back to them. So with that said, back to LaToya. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, David, thank you so much. And you're right, it really is understanding the purpose and how do you navigate through this. So when you started talking about increasing individuals' experiences, that just spoke right through me, because it is all about experience for individuals. So whether it's the consumer, so it's the external or internal, then it is all about that experience that creates loyalty and drives people back. So thank you so much, David. I'm sorry, Dr. David. So next up, we have Chris Ronzio, the founder and CEO of Trenio, a CAAS company that helps growing businesses automate their onboarding and training. Chris is also the host of the Process Makes Perfect podcast, author of 100 Hacks to Improve Your Business, and Inc. magazine contributor. With Trenio, Chris is on a mission to make small business easier by helping business leaders find the time to do more of what they love and providing a way to document and delegate what they do. Love it. Looking forward to hearing it. Audience, let's welcome Chris to the stage.
Hey everyone. So thank you, LaToya, so much for having me. playing with the slides behind the scenes in the green room gives me flashbacks to my first company, which was a video production company. So it is no small feat to pull off this effort. So thank you for putting this on today. So as she mentioned, I'm the CEO and founder of a software company called Trainual. Trainual, as the name suggests, is like a training manual for your business. So we're an HR and operations tech tool to really build the playbook for your company. And I'll take you through what that means. We're based in Scottsdale, Arizona. So unfortunately taking over as one of the hot spots for COVID in the country, but we've been fortunate to have hired a bunch of people over the last quarter and onboard them all remotely into our business. So that's what we're going to talk about today. How can you use technology to onboard and train people remotely so you can keep the business moving? So first, this is a crazy time, as everybody's talked about today. But the thing I want to point out is that because of the challenges in the market and the external conversations that are happening, we're all being forced to pivot our businesses. So there's new processes that you're having to develop. Maybe you've got a restaurant and you've never done delivery or pickup before. You had to pivot pretty quickly to figure that out to keep the lights on over the last few months. Or maybe you're adapting to other things, new customers going out of business, or opportunities for extra business that you didn't have a few months ago. So business is changing constantly, and that's the one constant is change. And so what we want to do is help you thrive through this. And the way that you can thrive is to keep your teams aligned and make sure that you're constantly keeping everyone updated with your best practices, your newest policies, and your procedures. So quick context on Trainual. We've had 10,000 sign up the platform in over 120 countries, and they've so far built 250,000 processes inside their business. So through our experience in working with these companies, we've built templates and best practices, and some of that I want to share with you here today. What we're doing is creating this new category, and we call it the playbook. But if you've tried to train people within your business in the past, chances are you've experienced some of these tools. You've set up Google Docs, you've made Word docs in Dropbox folders, you've put together scripts for phone calls or email templates, and you've tried to develop some sense of how your company operates. And if you've been investing in this, you're somewhere on that spectrum on the right-hand side. Maybe you've just got a paper manual, 3-ring binders. Maybe you've got some online collaborative documents. Or if you're at a big enterprise like Samsung, you might have an intranet or some learning management software. So Trainual exists kind of in between those tools. And really, like I said, we're building the playbook for your business. We straddle the operations and HR sides of the company. And this just came out 3 days ago. G2, which is the #1 review site, ranked us #1 in standard operating procedures and in training management. So that really speaks to how the way your business works includes the policies and how you handle people, but it also includes your processes and how you handle operations. So that's the space that we're playing in. It works for companies of all sizes. So we've got small businesses with 1, 2, 3 people just getting started, and we've got organizations that are training thousands. But really, it's about building your playbook. So I want you to think about that term. If someone told you you should have a playbook for your business, what would it include? Because it's not just flow charts and processes and bureaucratic policies. There's really a narrative and a story to it, because it's the story of how your business works. It's the history of where you've come from with the context that people need to know. It's having an amazing orientation to get new people up and running. And it's giving your team a sense of clarity so that they know the expectations for their role in the business and how to do each thing based on the knowledge in your company. So one of the things we did recently with everything going on in the world is invest a lot and energy to build out diversity and inclusion templates and how to have this conversation in the workplace. And so that's one of the things within Trainual that you could just click and add into your account. We also built COVID and work from home templates. These are policies that you might not have put much attention to in the past, but all of a sudden they're urgent. And you don't want to be caught in a place where you've got policies and processes that aren't thought through, and you've got employees asking questions. So a lot of developing training is being proactive instead of reactive. So like I mentioned, it works for a bunch of companies. Let's talk about, keep going through here. We'll talk about just quickly how it works. So whether you're using a system like ours or any system, here's an overview of how you should go about creating your content and assigning it to your teams. So first, inside Trainual, if you've ever written an email, a Word doc, a Google Doc, any kind of content editor, then you can produce materials in Trainual. You can do video, screen sharing, screen recording, photos, images, text, links, and embed from all sorts of places. So you start to build that content out, and then you organize it. So you group the materials into what does each department need to know? What does every team need to know? And what does every role in the business need to know? You can build tests because, as anyone that invests in training knows, checking that knowledge is really important. Again, closing the loop to make sure that your team understands what you've communicated. And then you assign the material. And in Trainual, you can assign either to a person or to a role in the business. And so a role is just a position that you might hire for again and again. And the advantage of assigning things to a role is when you invite users into a system like ours, you can say, this is the person, here's their email, and here's their role. And that assigns all of the training content with one click that you've built out for that person or for that role, so that they go through the sequence exactly as you've designed. And that's how you maintain a real consistent orientation, a real consistent onboarding, and consistent training, even when you're not face-to-face in the same room. So those users, those people will get a notification either on their watch, in their email, on their smartphone, and it'll tell them that the company's assigned them something new for them to know. They'll log into the system, and then they go step by step by step through the training that you've built. And with each step, they're acknowledging or marking complete that step. And the system saves a time and a date stamp that associates with that person. So one of the problems I always had running a business is that if I didn't set clear expectations, it's hard to hold people accountable when the thing doesn't go as you want it to. And so by doing something like this, by spelling and by tracking that they've gone through it, you can have a productive conversation if things don't go right. And you can say, was the training bad? Did you go through it too quickly? But that's what accountability is all about. And that's how you do it in the system. And like I started off with, we've got dozens and dozens of templates for all different areas of the business, so that based on your industry, based on your company size, and based on what you're focused on building out, you can plug and play different material into your company. So if you want to learn more about Trainual, I put our website down there at the bottom. I would suggest just go to our homepage, trainual.com at first, and browse the content, because our team has been building out so much content, so many resources since COVID launched about checklists and hiring guides and webinars. And so we're churning stuff out. So please check that out. And then we've also put together a special plan. If you go to trainual.com/Newark2020, you can sign up for a free trial account, and have all of the templates I've mentioned, diversity and inclusion templates, work from home templates, COVID and emergency planning templates, all preloaded into your account. So our goal more than anything is just to help make businesses easier and to help improve your company. And hopefully Trainual and the content on our site is a step in that direction.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was awesome. And I was introduced to Trainual. So who doesn't want their own playbook, right? Who doesn't want the opportunity to create the experience that as we've heard, is so important. So thank you so much for sharing and letting us know where to find those additional resources. And I loved it. Just the consistent content and the accessibility is user-friendly. So, we have our phones and everything in front of us all the time, our smartwatches and everything. So the fact that you have a tool that allows individuals to take away the excuses and to really cater to the lives that so many of us live, even in COVID, right? Being remote. So yeah, awesome. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So thank you again. Let me get the right thing up. So One Huddle, formerly Sales Huddle, is a workforce training platform that's getting people ready to work using quick burst games and helping companies across the globe to make training more fun and effective and accessible for their entire workforce. One Huddle is proud to be supported by some of the world's best VCs and investors, including 500 startups and Newark Venture Partners. Let us welcome to the stage Sam Colucci.
Today, One Huddle, we're a Newark-based tech startup. Very proud of our roots in the city of Newark. Very proud to work with the city of Newark. Today, I'm gonna spend a few minutes flying over why we exist and what One Huddle is doing, and hopefully you can take away just a few points that you might be able to use in your line of work as we all impact our community. So next slide, please. With that, companies everywhere are feeling a sense of being apart. This is especially true in a time of COVID, but that aside, being disconnected is real, and it's a major risk for our labor force, for our communities, and for businesses. Next slide, please. This sense of being disconnected, so I believe it's just not a hunch. According to Gallup, they ran one of the most comprehensive future of work studies in history. A book called It's the Manager is a must read. And they said that 15%, only 15% of the global workforce are engaged at work every day, wake up with a sense of excitement to go where they need to go. Only 1 in 3, or if you think of it as a percentage of work time, only a third of our time is spent a third of our work time is spent not working while at work, and 7 in 8 employees feel that they didn't even know the company mission statement when asked. Next slide, please. I think there are severe consequences that stem from this sense of being disconnected today in our workforce, but I'm going to give you 2 big ones as I share more about One Huddle. The first one is that companies lose time. When employees don't feel bought in, if they don't feel connected to each other, they don't feel connected to the mission, their performance and their enthusiasm is going to dip, and they're more likely to spend work time playing on social media than getting to work. Next slide, please. The second thing that you're going to lose is sales. Without a sense of teamwork, without a sense of shared goals, our people could fail to perform at the level that they're expected to do. This includes sales reps that miss deals. This also includes service reps who are not engaging customers. Ultimately, it means customers that are left with an experience that misses the mark. And these are the impacts of a disengaged, disconnected workforce. Next slide, please. So I want to impress upon everybody that there clearly is a problem, and we're talking a lot today about labor force. And in most cases, companies see this problem and they react in a particular way. I'm going to call it the more reaction. More trainings, more meetings, more videos, more manuals, more. At first glance, we get it. But I think largely it's not effective. Today, workforce and high-level workers, it's all about speed. Winning brands are fast. See, companies that have a learning platform, they have Zoom accounts, they have their meetings, they have their trainings, they have their managers, but they're still missing something. And our research at One Huddle found it, and we thought deeply about what is the perfect tool to level up. Della said this earlier, which I thought was great. What is the perfect tool to level up and fire up workers and do it quickly? Next slide, please. I'm going to make you run wild on this one. We're going to fly through some stuff. How about a game, everybody? See, games have been around as long as human civilization. E-learning, everybody, it's been around just since the 90s. Even video games have been around since the 80s. Hundreds of millions of people in every corner of the globe spend hundreds of billions of minutes every month playing console, PC, online, and mobile games. Games are popular in every demographic, gender, and race, but they're especially big among the generation of workers that are moving into our workforce. Unfortunately, you want to know the only place we don't find games? It's probably the place we need it most, at work. I want you to do me a quick favor, and I apologize to whoever has to click through my slides because I'm going to make you work on this next one. Think about a time that you were engrossed in a game. Next slide, please. For some, this might be golf, and you can just keep rolling with me as I go through it. For some, it might be dodgeball. For some, it might be, next slide, please. It might be beating your friend on a video game like Halo. For some, it might be a puzzle. Next slide. Next slide. That was me back in the day playing video games. Some might be a puzzle, and lastly, some it might be a trip to Vegas. For thousands of years, we've created things called games. And if you play poker you're a gamer. If you play golf, you're a gamer. If you collect frequent flyer miles, you're a gamer. If you collect rewards, you're a gamer. Everybody is a gamer in today's workforce. Next slide, please. So as I share with everybody, I want you to take these three notes away with you because I think these are critically important. To solve a problem of a workforce that's not connected, we know that play is powerful. And when we tap into it, we can do three things. First, we can get our people winning from anywhere. You can't really know where your team is at all times, especially today, and it means you're working in unusual circumstances. From home, in a park, on the go, the power of play, location doesn't matter. You can tap into your people's innate desire to compete, and this is going to translate into increased performance regardless of their work setting. Second, you're going to sustain day one motivation. What that means is imagine if every one of your workers walked around with the same sense of enthusiasm every day, just like day one. And finally, I want you to think about the tools you're using. Do they make it stick? 87% of what you learn in a live training, you forget within 30 days. With a game, you can get everyone on mission, on the same page, and ensure they remember exactly what they need to know to perform at a high level day in and day out. Just a few more slides here. The next slide is going to introduce you to One Huddle. At One Huddle, we take everything an employee needs to know, and we turn it into quick burst mobile games. Really proud of our work in the city of Newark to fight to make sure every worker, regardless of access to technology or skill level or role in their workforce, gets access to the information and the training they need to be successful. We do it with three key points as I move to close here in a moment. The next slide is going to talk about how the first tenet of One Huddle is we believe authoring should be fast and easy. Content is everywhere, everybody. I just don't believe that the HR person is the only person that can build learning today. So with One Huddle, you can build games in minutes from the front lines. Play is powerful, but the creation of and authoring of content has got to be seamless. Next slide, number 2, you got to be able to play from anywhere, everybody. Our games at One Huddle are quick, they're easy. Games can be played in 2 to 3 minute quick bursts. We were built to be mobile first from day one because we think that workforces invest in only desktop-based training tools, especially now. The future of work is no longer in the future, it is today. We need to make sure everybody can be a part of it. And then the last point I'll make, third, is we got to reward winners. Think of One Huddle like a weekly fantasy sports tournament. Every Monday, games spin up. Winner by the end of the week unlocks different types of rewards and recognition. So we believe a competitive environment is a good thing. We believe that we need to challenge our workers more. They'll learn better through struggle, but we have to ask and we have to create an environment to do it. Just clicking through the video doesn't do it anymore. So a big part of One Huddle is about rewarding the winners. Thank you. So as I move to close, this is my wife, Jamila, and my beautiful daughter, Nico. While working from home, like most folks are doing, the other day, my daughter came rumbling down our stairs. She dropped every piece of a half dozen puzzles down the stairs with her as she came down. You know, I've appreciated the opportunity to experience time with my daughter and my family. And after, I would say on this one day, stopping work in the middle of the day to join in puzzles, it really kind of gets me wondering. And it makes me think, what kind of work is she going to be doing? What will she be performing? What kind of managers is she going to have? What kind of leaders out there are going to challenge her? What should I be preparing her for as a parent? And I wonder, if we really engage in the technology available, where would we be? You all are the business leaders. You're the community leaders. You drive our economy. You motivate employees. You invest most and pick the tools that make our jobs better. So as I close, I want to close in with a little bit of gaming terms, and it's your move. Thank you.
Carolyn is the CEO of Diversity, Inc. After 16 years of serving in different capacities, Ms. Johnson was promoted to Chief Executive Officer. I watched Carolyn's growth through the organization. She's moved through the ranks, and you know, when they talk about paying dues, she's paid her dues. She's been the gold standard, and Diversity Inc. has been the gold standard of measurement pertaining to effective diversity, inclusion, and equity strategies, and the development and execution of the annual Diversity Inc. Top 50 competition, which is regarded as the gold housekeeping seal of approval when assessing fairness and equal access and opportunity for all in the workplace. So without further ado, Carolyn Johnson.
Thank you, Della. And I have to say, what an honor it is to be invited to wrap up such a historic day in the city of Newark. When I received an email inviting me to serve as the afternoon speaker at this inaugural citywide summit, I initially thought to myself, wow, thank you for assigning me such an easy topic, right? Racial equality has already been achieved, right? No. Quiet as is kept, racial and gender equality were established in the beginning when the human race was created. We shouldn't have to have these conversations. It was already established when life was breathed into us. But when I reread the invitation and reviewed today's agenda, I noticed my specific assignment was to address racial equity. All day long, subject matter experts have been exploring various aspects of closing the divide. Based on what I've heard throughout the day, so far the summit has addressed the digital divide, strategies for shifting organizational culture, methods to address injustices based on ethnicity, ways to break down barriers, navigating COVID-19 related disparities and dissidents, digital recruitment and training, and transition for schoolwork and community involvement. Social and economic factors impact all of these topics. So my assignment is really not easy at all. Closing the so-called racial divide is complicated. Although equity and equality sound familiar, they have very different meanings. Let's deal with equality first. Ever since 1776, America has claimed to hold the truth to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That's what's written in the Declaration of Independence, and Independence Day for some is just around the corner. Let's just pretend that John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston meant mankind or humanity when they said men. 20 minutes isn't enough time for me to cover the origin of the concept of race to justify the African slave trade, intersectionality and how Black women are doubly impacted by sexism and racism, the history of the women's rights movement, and take us through all of the twists and turns from 3/5 compromise reached at the Constitutional Convention of 1787 when Blacks were counted as 3/5 of a person, or to the Supreme Court's 1857 Dred Scott decision that Blacks weren't American citizens and therefore couldn't sue for freedom in federal court, or to its overturning when the 14th Amendment passed in 1866. Way back then, the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment was intended to prevent anti-Black discrimination. Nearly a century later, after the Civil War, Reconstruction, and Jim Crow and Jane Crow, the 14th Amendment was cited in the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Yet here we are in 2020, 154 years after the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and 54 years after the second Civil Rights Act in 1964, still seeking to achieve equity. Even if you don't study history in your leisure, you've probably seen or heard about Ava DuVernay's 13th. Her groundbreaking documentary tells some of us and reminds others that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery and protected the rights of Black Americans. But there was a loophole. Slavery or servitude was okay if it was for the punishment of a crime. Here's where things tend to get a little sticky. There are far too many instances in America's past and present where it would seem that being Black is a crime. You didn't ask me to address decarceration or the prison industrial complex, and so I won't, but I will say that weaponized racial fear negatively impacts employment and earning potential. we've been having conversations about what is systemic racism. For me, if I had to unpack it, systemic racism is everywhere opportunity exists, Black people are denied. That is systemic racism. And so weaponized racial fear is a contributing factor in the ever-widening opportunity, achievement, and wealth gaps between white and Black Americans. I'm not a subject matter expert when it comes to the Constitution or the criminal justice system, but I do know a thing or two about destroying disparities. As CEO of Diversity Inc., and Della shared that I've been with the organization for 17 years, and I've had different roles in those 17 years. Where I'd say I've enjoyed the part of the work the most is when we help corporations see past gender, ethnicity, disability, and sexual orientation. I and all the 14 other people that work day in, day out tirelessly at Diversity Inc., we truly believe all people are created equal. We all come in different shapes and sizes, genders and ethnicities and nationalities, but we are all members of the human race. I started with a historical overview to show that systemic racism and Eurocentrism, or white supremacy, whatever you used to call it, whatever you choose to call it, is deeply ingrained in our society. We see it manifest in many ways in the workplace. Behaviorists call these manifestations microaggressions and unconscious bias. Now, if you've ever heard me speak before or read anything that I have written, you have heard me say, I don't believe in unconscious bias. Unfortunately, there's unchecked bias in companies where people don't benefit from diverse perspectives. For too long, racial tolerance was the goal. When this was the case, affirmative action was the order of the day. There was a perception that unqualified people of color were given preferential treatment. I'm glad that the goal of this is equity. We need to do more than put up with people who aren't like us. Right thing to do, but it's also a business imperative. It's the profitable thing to do. And that's why Diversity Inc.'s mission is to educate people on the business benefits of diversity and help corporations and companies make their workplaces more inclusive. The digital divide is one of the barriers to entry. 31 million Black and Brown Americans who cannot afford digital technology is too much human capital to waste. Addressing the digital divide can lead to economic growth and wage increases, easier access to medical care, lower cost online education, and job opportunities. A majority of employers will only accept applications online. Once hired, more and more blue-collar workers are being required to access work assignments digitally. And students, especially after COVID, and I have to tell you, I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, even the 4-year-old's assignments are coming across via Zoom and other digital platforms. And so even at the early age of 4, work assignments and coursework are having to be done online. If America is to remain competitive internationally, we cannot afford to have tens of millions of people without access to home computers and affordable, high-speed broadband connectivity. Closing the digital divide opens the workforce diversity and inclusion pipeline. I said it before and I'll say it again for emphasis. Equity has nothing to do with tolerance or affirmative action. Favoring incompetent individuals belonging to certain groups known to have been discriminated against in the past is not profitable. Recruiting high caliber, diverse talent is profitable. For sure, anti-Black racism remains a factor in the hiring process. According to a recent study conducted by the Institute for Social Research in partnership with Northwestern and Harvard universities, white applicants receive 36% more callbacks for jobs than their equally qualified Black counterparts. And I want to just pause here for a minute to talk about punching outside of your weight class. And so according to a study done by the National Science Center, in looking at individuals who are Black who received a 4-year degree focused on STEM on their way to receive a PhD, there were 10 schools that produced more Black individuals in that population than the other. And I'm sure you know that they're all HBCUs. But I want to dig into that a little bit more. Of all the HBCUs, and HBCU stands for Historically Black College or University, of all of those HBCUs, Howard University was the #1 producer of that talent. In a 10-year period, looking at 2008 to 2018, Howard produced 220 STEM-focused PhDs. Now, if we look at Harvard, Yale, MIT, and Stanford, that same group of colleges and universities produced 221. Now, that's what you call punching outside of your weight class, but it gets better. If you think about the endowment of those 4 schools, it's between 90 and $100 billion. You want to know what the endowment of Howard is? 750 million. We are producers when we have an opportunity to compete. So I want to just also take a moment to talk about the Diversity Top 50 event, where I had an opportunity to do a Zoom fireside with Michael Dowling, who's the president and CEO of Northwell Health. And he says that leaders need to be constructively disruptive in their outspokenness. And he's right. Silence is violence. When I think about how much is at stake right now during this Black Lives Matter awakening, and I'm going to say that again, Black Lives Matter awakening, I am reminded of what German pastor Martin Niemöller said during the reign of Adolf Hitler. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. It's encouraging to see people of different ethnicities at Black Lives Matter marches, rallies, and peaceful protests. We need allies. We have to work together across ethnic lines to create workforce environments where anti-racist materials are accessible, maybe even mandatory. It's not enough to encourage courageous conversations. Companies must provide their people with the tools they need to change equity. Diversity Inc., if you go to our homepage, there's a said reading. Of all of the books that are there, just a few that you may want to consider reading to educate yourself on how to be an anti-racist, starting with Dr. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, Paul Butler's Chokehold, Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, and Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns. CNBC's Make It recently spoke with business leaders about how allies might engage thoughtful dialogue with coworkers about the nationwide demonstrations demanding racial equality and justice in policing. The takeaways for our non-Black allies were, 1, recognize your privilege. Ask yourself, once you've recognized, what can you do to help someone who doesn't look like you with that remarkable privilege? Educate yourself. Check in and speak up. Understand that silence is complicit. Hire, promote, and support Black professionals. If we think about the city of New York, once they came up with the rule that says that you cannot discriminate against someone because of their hair, they took it as far as to go back and look at people who were fired because of their natural hair. That's one of the great ways in which you can show up and right some of the wrongs as well. And so, as counterintuitive as this may sound, companies seeking to diversify their workforces don't need to start with recruiting. Sustainable change starts at the top. We call it a leaky bucket. If your culture is not one that is inviting and allows people to feel like they belong and are valued, you can add as much diversity to your workforce as you want, but you won't be able to keep it, and you won't be able to unleash that innovation that makes you competitive. CEOs and their direct reports create company culture. Leaders at every level must educate themselves about how classism and systemic racism have negatively impacted their Black, brown, and poor employees and customers. One way to affect change in any sector, whether it be public, private, or civic, is to measure and monitor progress towards specific goals. It doesn't mean just throw money at the problem, have no measures in place, no tracking mechanisms in place, and just wash your hands of it and say we're all done. We gave money to fill in the blank. Every year, to that point, Diversity Inc. Hosts and we compile a list of the nation's top 50 companies for diversity. The data that we collect through this competition is company submitted. It is not about employees' feelings or opinions about the places where they work. The CEO or the most senior HR executive in the organization must sign off on the submission. Again, it is company submitted data. And you also need to know it's a methodical, data-driven, competitive process. More than 1,800 companies sign up to compete. And what they're competing for is being able to rank as a top 50 company. Hospitals and health systems also compete to be a top hospital or health care system. And they are all completing a 200+ question survey where we look at specifically look at and measure, ethnic and gender representation in management, fairness in hiring, development, and promotion of underrepresented groups, supplier diversity, philanthropy, talent acquisition, management and retention, mentoring and sponsorship, workplace practices and employee benefits, leadership accountability, and board of director diversity. And I'm sure you're probably hearing a lot about the board of directors right now. And again, when we say that it starts at the top, we're seeing a lot of companies that are focused on making sure that they are inclusive places to work, have board involvement when it comes to compensation, when it comes to compensation, when it comes to hiring. And so we're making sure that we're looking at board diversity as well. In addition to looking at those areas, we even go as far as to analyze the gender and ethnic makeup of each company's 10% highest paid population. Our questionnaire is designed to uncover window dressing and woke washing. And so woke washing is when a corporation superficially aligns with progressive causes while continuing to perpetuate inequality behind the scenes, like saying Black Lives Matter, but not making any changes to your executive leadership team so that Black people can be represented by way of voice in the room when decisions are being made. You can't trust and believe that the companies on our top 50 have set specific diversity and inclusion goals, and they're measuring their progress toward achieving them. And that's why they're transparent. They're doing it. I hope I'm not making it sound like these companies are perfect. All have a long way to go. Even the companies in our Hall of Fame, and that means that since 2012, they ranked #1. And remind you, we've been doing this competition for 20 years. But since 2012, those companies ranked #1. And even in years where they did not rank #1, they performed as a top 10 company. So in 2020, Marriott International was named #1. And in 2020, our Hall of Fame companies are AT&T, EY, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Novartis Pharmaceuticals Corporation, Sodexo, and Kaiser Permanente, which is a healthcare hospital system and also a health insurer. So those are our Hall of Fame organizations. But it's important that even though they have a long way to go, we commend them for trying. We know that they are among the best places to work, and they are aware of their need to do better. More importantly, the top 50 companies for diversity are aware of the benefits of closing the racial divide. One is wide-reaching relevance, another is increased profitability. And so in closing, ever since 1619, Blacks have been improving America's bottom line. Let's make 2020 together the year we make that let's make 2020 the year that we cash the check Dr. King spoke about at the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. He said, when the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. May his words inspire us to set specific, measurable goals toward closing the digital divide and racial divides that exacerbate America's opportunity, achievement, and wealth gaps. Della and team at the Alliance, thank you again for this amazing opportunity to address as your closing speaker. And I hope that there's anything you need in the future, you will definitely reach out to me. Again, thank you to all for participating today.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. So I got some real gems in that message. And I also heard a challenge for our Newark corporations. So we are going to reconnect on how do we want to see a Newark company on that top 10 list. I know it's going to take some work for us to get there, but we are willing to step up. And I'm going to speak on our behalf as a collective that we are going to work really hard to achieve some of those metrics. And I hope my partners are listening out there. We can do this. You know, we don't like coming in second, third, or fourth. We can definitely work towards this and strive to be on the list. The second challenge for our audience, we have to punch our way outside of our weight class. That was powerful. Very, very powerful. So for everyone listening today, take the charge up. Understand that, yes, our backs may be against the wall, but we've got to punch our way out this box. All of our allies, we need you to lift the rope so we can get in the ring and really work towards closing the divide. So Carolyn, I thank you so much for your time today. I thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience, and just continue to do the work that you do at Diversity Inc. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching Newark 2020 Hire Newark's Closing the Divide Summit, hosted by Newark 2020 Project Director Della M. Walker Jr. and LaToya Sands, Managing Director per Scholas Newark. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hire Newark NJ. That is one word, Hire Newark NJ. Also follow us on LinkedIn at Newark 2020. Thank you for attending.